New Thought Media Network is pleased to present The Inclusive Church, Ideas and Resources for Leaders of Multicultural Ministries. The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Tuesdays at 12 noon Mountain Time. Join Tracy and her guests as they go deep and share practical tips and resources you can use in your ministry. And now let's explore the Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown.
Hello, everybody. It's Tracy Brown here, and you are here for the Inclusive Church. Or if you just happen to get here by accident, maybe you were on the YouTube channel or on Facebook and you just heard the music, stay with us because today is going to be a fun and informative session. I am so glad to welcome you in. Two quick inoculations that if you're a regular, you are expecting me to share. Number one, Inclusive Church. We're talking about church as a collection of people, as a community of people sharing spiritual foundations, learning and practicing spiritual principles together, not a building. You may have a building, but the church is the people. That's the assumption and the place from which we come during this show. And then second, when you hear me talking about being a leader in an inclusive spiritual community or demonstrating leadership, then I'm not just talking about ministers. I'm talking about everyone who serves in a leadership role. So this show, Inclusive Church, is all about giving you some ideas and giving you some resources that you can use to be successful in your multicultural ministry. I authored a book, Stained Glass Spirit, a few years ago. That's what I'm looking for because I'm like, I know I have it. Stained Glass Spirit, Becoming a Spiritual Community where oneness does not require sameness. And that book was pretty much focused on the why. Like, how do you explain the imperative to be inclusive from a spiritual perspective, especially in a New Thought spiritual or metaphysical spiritual community? And now with Inclusive Church, it's about being inclusive, not should you or should you not be, but what are some things to keep in mind? What are some ideas you can use? What are some conversations you might have? And what are some resources that will help you do that? In the month of July 2024, we are going to spend quite a bit of time, at least half of the sessions in July, on including people with disabilities and what that means, and what are some things like, what are some checklists you might have or some points that you want to keep in mind to be sure that you are being inclusive in terms of including people with a variety of different disabilities or differing abilities. But today we are going to really dive into one specific resource that is focused on anti-racism, or being a church where people are vocal about and are demonstrating a commitment to end race-based hatred or violence, race-based discomfort, race-based disparity in treatment of all people involved in the community. And I'm going to tell you about this particular book, wait, is that racist? I love the title. I loved the title of the book, and that is actually what made me pick it up, even before I realized that the book was focused on anti-racism in spiritual communities. So if you see the book cover, what happens. I didn't even see that when I first picked up the book. And then I noticed the author was Kerry Connelly, and that also would have been a clue to me. So let me tell you a little bit about the authors. Obviously, I am recommending this book if you want to recognize some patterns in your church that may be harmful if you're trying to be inclusive based on race and ethnicity. But I also recommend this book because it has some fabulous examples of things you can do. And so the book is a resource, but it is also full of additional resources. And so I've put a link in the comments or in the chat if you want to actually go check out the book. And it does come in both print and digital versions. So the three authors are primarily Kerry Connelly, plus Bryana, Clover, and Josh Riddick. And I do believe one of the reasons this book is so practical is because of the way these three authors support each other and are involved with each other. So Kerry Connelly, that name may sound familiar to some of you. Kerry Connelly is the author of Good White Racists, Confronting Your Role in Racial Injustice. And she also wrote a book before that titled Pause, Making Time to Walk with God. So she is very spiritually or religious and spiritually grounded in the work, and not only approaching race and racism from the perspective of politics or discrimination. Bryana Clover. At the time that this book was written, was the founder and CEO of 1619 Consulting. And if the year 1619 rings a bell with you, like coming from the work of racism in the U.S. since 1619, her company, 1619 Consulting, focuses on racial equity education, and she does a lot of facilitation in all kinds of industries and groups and a lot of community work. And then Josh Riddick was a co-founder of a group called the Kindred Collective. And the Kindred Collective works specifically with faith communities, nonprofits, and some businesses to become culturally and racially inclusive. All three of these fabulous folks live in different parts of the country. So the collaboration that they came together to do in this book, Wait, Is This Racist?, was really fabulous. So I'm going to highlight a few quotes, and actually I do hope that everything that I share will inspire you to click on the link and order the book if you are a leader in a spiritual community that knows it is important to do some work related to shifting the consciousness that allows racism to exist. Now, you won't hear me in the work I do, you won't hear me say anti-racism very often unless I'm quoting someone, because as some of you know, I am very much focused on what I want, not what I don't want. Now, I don't want racism, and anti-racism means against racism. I am against racism, but in the work I do, I'm more focused on creating an environment that no longer supports a consciousness of racism or race-based hatred and violence. So what do we have when we don't have that? When we no longer have racism, we have an inclusive society. We have a church that is welcoming and affirming to people from all racial and ethnic identity groups. And so typically when you hear me doing my own work or leading my own events, I will be talking about what it looks like once we have ended or interrupted racism. And I will describe that as moving from hatred to harmony, or what are we going to do to live together in full equality. But I don't have a problem with this book or with really anyone who uses anti-racism, because in some ways that's more direct and very clear about exactly what you are focused on. So in the author's note at the beginning, Kerry Connelly writes this that I think will be helpful to many people. Quoting, "I've spent a lot of time discerning whether white people even have a place in this work, and have arrived at the unequivocal answer that yes, we absolutely do. It is, after all, the wounded white soul that is doing all this harm. We need white leaders to accompany white people through the journey of their identity deconstruction, and imaginative visionaries to help us find a new way to be white in the world. To that end, my work in studying whiteness as a construct and inviting the collective into a new imagination continues, and I also willingly seek out and submit to accountability to my white BIPOC siblings." I want to highlight that because often when people think of anti-racism work or work to interrupt or end race-based hatred and violence, they think of Black people, Hispanic people, or people of color need to be out in front doing the work. If people of color could create an anti-racist church, it would have been done a long time ago, because they are not the ones perpetrating the racism, the historical pattern of racism. And so it is really important, and especially in our spiritual communities, that this work be led by, or that there are very visible people who identify as white, who are in the lead and in partnership with people of color in doing this important work. So Kerry Connelly got a lot of negative feedback, and was challenged quite a bit during the release of and during the early stages of her book, Good White Racists: Confronting Your Role as a White Person in Racial Injustice. And so in the intro to this book, that was part of her response in the author's notes. So what do I want to say about this book before I give you one very powerful example? And I'm watching the time because, as some of you know, when I don't have a featured guest where we're both talking and in dialogue together, I really do try to keep this to 30 to 35-ish minutes. So you have some very clear information, maybe a practical tip or two, something you can use or try, and or a resource, and then I let you get back into your day. So the table of contents will tell you something about how Kerry Connelly structured this book. So there are 10 chapters, and they then lead you ideally into your own personal plan of action. So there is a call to action at the end of the book for you to define for yourself. So each of the 10 chapters focuses on an aspect of leading, creating, sustaining an anti-racist church. So leadership is a chapter in itself. What does leader, if you're a leader, or if you're trying to develop a core group of leaders on this topic, what is it that leadership needs to be aware of? Number 2, preaching and liturgy. And I love that she gives some very specific food for thought in terms of the content, the message, the examples you use, and the impact that they can have, both positive and negative. Chapter 3 is about the music and how you can't be an anti-racist church if all the music you play is music written by and or performed by people who are white. Number 4, small groups. And she spends a bit of time here about the importance of small groups, which in ministry, small groups really have an important place and make an important contribution. And when you are either educating people related to the impact, the negative impact of racism, or when you are trying to support people in your church who are building cross-cultural skills for the first time, the way you plan, orient, and support your small groups can be make or break. Because if people get in your small groups and then they have some race-related conflict or some misunderstandings because of cultural norms that are very common based on race and ethnicity, and they don't realize, one, that that's going to happen, and 2, they don't have the skills to navigate it, and 3, they don't know where to go, or the worst is 4, when it's happening and they don't realize it's really, oh, you're uncomfortable because this is a race-based cultural norm that is not the same way you are accustomed to engaging, then, it just blows up. And if your small groups blow up, then that has an impact when you have the larger community together. Chapter 5 is about your buildings and grounds. So whether you're doing church in a box, or whether you're meeting in a city park, or whether you're meeting on a line, then there are things that you want to keep in mind about the physical facility that you are in. And absolutely, Evelyn, ask me a question and I will see it and I will wrap it into my comments. And that is not just for Evelyn, that is for any of you who I can see are watching on YouTube and Facebook and even LinkedIn. So sure, put your question in the comments or the chat. The next chapter, chapter 6, is focused on communication, and Kerry Connelly does a really good job. Actually, all three of them, Bryana, Josh, and Kerry, do a really good job of talking about how culture impacts communication, and both print communication and verbal communication. Chapter 7 is about missions and service. And this is an interesting chapter for me because in my book, Stained Glass Spirit, I did this piece around being sure you clarify the difference between outreach for partnership and things that you are doing for charity and or community service. And so that question comes up in a different way in this book. Wait, is this racist? A Guide to Becoming a Community and Anti-Racist Church. There are three more chapters in this book, Children and Youth, which is if you have a church or a spiritual community where you have an established program for young people, or if you are trying to build one, there are some good tips here to keep in mind. Number 9, pastoral care. I'm smiling because I love this chapter, and it's a reminder that there really are cultural norms related to disease, illness, healing, death rituals and rites. And when you are providing pastoral care to people who are from a different cultural or ethnic background than your own, if you're not aware of that and you just show up to tend to people, to support people the way that is most important to you, you can actually offend them more than help them. And that then has an effect of them leaving your community or feeling uncomfortable in your community. And then chapter 10 is about modeling interracial dialogue. Now, I have a tip about this. So often people who have made a commitment to do anti-racism work or to interrupt or end race-based hatred and violence and to develop a commitment to that in their spiritual community, oh my goodness. So often they actually think, well, we're going to start with interracial dialogue. And nobody in the room has any experience and they don't know what they're doing. And then it backfires and people are upset and tense. And they didn't realize how important it was to have someone who is really skilled, either teach the skill or to facilitate the first few meetings, because otherwise you often will get the brunt of miscommunication happening, and people will take sides and will forget there are no sides in the circle of God. There are no sides in the circle. And so we may be standing at different places in the circle. We may be exposed to different things in the circle. But if we're going to have effective interracial dialogue, we have to have a framework that allows us to recognize we're all in the same circle. And we want to see and notice and recognize and appreciate the different experiences that we have and have had. But that doesn't put us on opposite sides of an issue. It gives us the opportunity to see the circle more fully and to come together with a solution or a strategy that includes us all. So those are the 10 chapters, and I mentioned them all because the only one I'm going to really highlight is an excerpt that's in the chapter on small groups. And you may remember what I said about small groups is that often we have small groups in our communities, whether we formally planned them or not. But in this case, we're talking about really when we're creating small groups to create some familiarity, to create community, to help people get to know each other better. And when we do that, there are some things to keep in mind. So most of this book was written from the perspective of how do I help people who are white, who identify as white, who are experienced as white? How do I educate and support them in creating an anti-racist church? And if you joined us later than at the very beginning, I'm putting a link to this book back in the chat. Wait, is this racist? A Guide to Becoming an Anti-Racist Church by Kerry, Connelly, with also Bryana, Clover, and Josh Riddick. So in this chapter on small groups, here's the first paragraph. If church is about community, then nowhere does the nuts and bolts of what it means to be in relationship happen more intensely than at your weekly small group. If my elementary school days taught me anything, it's that groupthink and social dynamics are compelling factors in our sense of belonging and self-esteem. And there is nothing like a second grader's birthday party to let you know whether you're part of the in group or part of the out group. Just because we're grown-ups now doesn't necessarily mean we play well with others any better than we did back in the day. It's not that we don't want to be awesome grown-ups. It's just that we're probably better at holding fast to stereotypes, social mores, and status quo that make us feel super comfortable than we are at dismantling them. After all, they become nice and familiar, like a cozy blanket we can wrap up in whenever we're feeling insecure. What makes these deep beliefs and motivations insidious, however, is that within them lie all the racist tropes we rightfully love to hate, but they're buried deep and usually only come out in those frustrating, awkward social moments when someone in the room is left thinking, wait, did he mean what I think he meant by that comment? For people who are not a member of the dominant identity group, these awkward moments are not just cringeworthy, they are utterly exhausting and possibly dangerous. Later in this chapter, Kerry really does focus on the subtitle is Racialized Context in All White Spaces. And she does provide some really good background. And Bryana Clover provides a really good summary of anti-racism task forces. But here's what I want to share with you, that Kerry wrote. The racism we experience in all white spaces can be ridiculously blatant or incredibly subtle, but we all know when it's happening. What's important is what happens next. Will the other white people in the room choose to be anti-racist and confront what happened, or will we all stay silent? A racialized context or event becomes a racist context or event when the racist act is not confronted, called out, and dismantled by white people. When racialized events occur in mixed groups and it's left to the person of color in the room to confront it, it's still a racist event because the white people are leaving the labor of anti-racism to the person or the people of color. Either way, whether in mixed or all white spaces, if white people are not confronting racist comments or actions, white silence is inaction. White silence is complicity, and complicity is racist. So, one of the reasons I love this book and highly recommend it is because there's straight talk like that throughout the book. It's not mean. It's actually very, very well positioned, but it's direct. These are things you can do. These are things you must do. And how do you answer the question, wait, is this racist? How do you figure that out? How do you involve people from different groups together to work on figuring it out? And then what do you do about it? So in this week's toolkit version of the Inclusive Church on the New Thought Media Network, that is my resource that I am sharing with you today. Wait, is this racist? And if you do have questions, you can put them in the comments or chat. I usually do go back even after the show is over and go through and look at them. Or you can post a comment on the Stained Glass Spirit Facebook page as well, and I can respond there. But that's it for this week's episode of Inclusive Church. I hope you got one idea or one thing to think about, one idea that motivates you to do something different or something that gets you thinking about what you can do to make sure you do what Kerry Connelly has said, that you in your spiritual community become an anti-racist church. Later this month, I'll be visiting with Reverend Dr. Raymond Anderson about including the deaf community in your spiritual community or in your church. And we'll also have some conversations with others about other disabilities and things to keep in mind. So thanks for joining today on Inclusive Church. My name is Tracy Brown, and I am so glad that you are with me today. I'll see you again soon.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.
People of African Descent New Thought Group proudly presents Celebrating Our Soul, Consciously Creating Change at Unity Village, Thursday, August 1st through Sunday, August 4th. Some of our greatest keynote speakers, some of our finest musicians and vocalists, some of our amazing and experienced panelists, and some of our fabulous masterclass presenters will be there for you at Celebrating Our Soul, Consciously Creating Change at Unity Village this summer. Regular registration ends June 30th, so don't delay. Register today at padntg.com. Sponsorship opportunities are available at padntg.com. Volunteer opportunities are available at padntg.com. Go there now, padntg.com.